to India, which has welcomed the two-week ceasefire in the Iran war and called for the unimpeded flow of trade through the Strait of Hormuz. The country was hit particularly hard by Iran's blockade. About 50% of India's crude oil and most of its liquefied gas passes through the waterway, and its closure sent Delhi scrambling to expand its energy base. India is now importing from more than 40 countries, including Iran, confirming just a few days ago the first purchase of Iranian crude since 2019. India is also expanding its energy trade with Russia and is in talks to restart liquid natural gas imports. The first time that's happened since the Ukraine war began. Well, let's examine how this war has affected India's geopolitical calculus with Archishman Ray Goswami. He's a non-resident fellow at the Observer Research Foundation, India's leading geopolitical think tank. His areas of expertise include international security and intelligence diplomacy. He joins us from Delhi. Welcome to DW. We all know by now that most of the oil that passes through the Strait of Hormuz is heading for Asia. Talk us through how India fits within that and how hard it's been hit by Iran's blockade.
Well, certainly, the global reverberations from the Straits of Hormuz and amid the Iran war have certainly been felt in India, too. India has certainly been affected in the energy sector. Approximately 90% of India's LPG is imported through the strait, is imported from global sources, and about 60% of that volume passes through the Straits of Hormuz. So it's certainly been a major consideration within Indian decision-making and broadly within India's strategic calculus and even within its domestic policy. India's also been impacted in several ways as they relate to the security of its diaspora within the Gulf. Approximately 9 to 10 million Indian citizens live within the Gulf states alone, and ensuring their security has been a primary area of focus for the Indian government.
Right.
As the Foreign Secretary of India, Vikram Misri, said at a recent meeting, India certainly has skin in the game, given the fact that 3 citizens have already been killed in stray projectile firing across the Straits of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf. And certainly, aviation's been affected too. India's primary aviation traffic to the West and to Europe in particular has been impacted by the conflict within across the Straits of Hormuz, within the Persian Gulf, and in Iran more generally. So it's three distinct areas, but all of these have factored into Indian planning at different levels.
And how close has India come to picking a side in this conflict?
Well, it certainly picked a side in the sense that it's picked its own side. India's primary objectives within this war are as follows. 1, ensuring its own energy security, and B, ensuring the security of its own citizens. To that end, what it's done is that it's been left with something of a cleft stick. It has close relations with essentially all belligerents in this conflict, the US, Israel, Iran, even the GCC states. And what India has essentially tried to do over the course of this war is, rather than picking a side, it's tried to use its close relations with each of these countries to to individually reiterate to them the shared responsibility they hold as belligerents in furthering this war through participation in it, and similarly in bringing it to an end in the interests of both international security and in India's own strategic interests. To that end, there's been a certain degree of friction, you might say, between India and certain partners. The US, for instance, has been very insistent on having India join the Hormuz naval coalition during the early to middle stages of this war to secure the passage of energy through the Straits of Hormuz. But India, on the other hand, has chosen instead to engage Iran bilaterally and independently of US or Israeli influence in order to ensure the safe passage of its ships. In a similar vein, it's constantly been in dialogue with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel and with President Donald J. Trump. So South Bloc's definitely been working the fronts, and the objective has been to ensure its energy interests mainly.
Understood. But how is it then that Narendra Modi has repeatedly condemned Iranian attacks on Arab states, but not US-Israeli attacks on Iran?
Well, that's a great question. I would say that India's view on this has still been fairly even-handed. Certainly, you're absolutely right in stating that India has been consistent in condemning or expressing its strong disapproval of Iranian strikes, particularly on Gulf oil fields. At the same time, India's expressed its strong disapproval of US and Israeli strikes in different ways. The prime minister has spoken to his counterpart, the president of Iran, Masoud Pezeshkian, on two separate occasions, on the 12th of March and on the 21st of March, the latter to celebrate, to express his greetings on the day of Nowruz. And during that second meeting in particular, he expressly condemned attacks on Iran's both civilian infrastructure and in critical infrastructure, as per tweets put out by the office of the prime minister in their immediate aftermath. The foreign secretary of India in particular, Vikram Misri, was seen at the Iranian embassy in New Delhi signing a condolence register on the 5th of March, just 4 days after a US strike on a girls' school in the Minab province of the country. So India's definitely working the phones. It's engaging both parties.
Okay.
And certainly it's got a very close relationship with the US and Israel, but it's careful to make sure that this does not bear on its relationship with Iran either.
India had to make some painful concessions to secure a series of trade deals with Washington, most notably cutting Russian oil imports. This war saw India increase its use and purchase of Russian oil because of difficulties caused by Trump's war. So how significant an own goal was that?
Well, the thing is, India's relationship with Russia, particularly in the energy sector, stretches back years, decades, and it's essentially been you've seen India increase its purchases of Russian oil, especially since 2022 with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. That's continued well into the second Trump administration, despite President Trump's initial reprimands to India in the early months of his administration. That seems to have petered out on the end of the White House. But regardless, India's never made any public acknowledgement of of President Trump's so-called assertions that India had indeed stopped its purchases of Russian oil. Recall that in December 2025, President Vladimir Putin, in fact, visited New Delhi at the height of these tensions. And India continued, as a result, to buy Russian oil even in its aftermath in different ways. In fact, just a few days ago, you had the first deputy prime minister of Russia, Denis Manturov, visit India and meet with the prime minister, the external affairs minister, the national security advisor, and the minister of finance.
So that relationship is ongoing and deepening, regardless of what Washington has to say. Just a final point on this war, which has now reached this point of ceasefire. Are you able to tell us what polling says about how Indians regard this war? Have Indians picked a side?
Well, Indians in particular essentially do want the war to end. Ultimately, at the end of the day, within India, it's all got to do with, the prices of your electricity bill or what you pay for a certain meal within a restaurant. And to that end, India has been happy to see a ceasefire take place just over the past 24 hours. It's definitely in the Indian citizens' interest to see this war end, see prices stabilize, which to an extent they have begun to do, beginning the middle of last month, and see this continue. So it's certainly in the Indian streets' interest to see a durable peace take hold.
All right, thank you for talking us through that so clearly. Archishman Ray Goswami from the Observer Research Foundation. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.